Actually the country that has traditionally introduced human rights language at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, almost universally to have it removed, often by the United States or others who are uncomfortable with that language. You are essentially representing the only Latin American registered drug policy organization present at the conference, or at least registered with explicit drug policy mandate. What reflections do you have to offer us from the Brazil experience, both nationally and internationally? How do you think it's going to go in terms of this UN process, but also as Brazil wrestles with questions of urban violence and as the drugs issue extends beyond just the kinds of harm reduction commitments that Alex was talking about to encompass a range of political issues in the country? What are you seeing and what are you predicting? And there's a microphone just beside Alex.
Good afternoon. I was actually surprised to be in this panel. And I'm a minority here. I'm the only one from a developing country. So, and I was thinking, why did they put me here, you know, among all those prominent scholars all over around the world.
Around the world.
It's an honor to be among you. But anyway, yesterday I managed to write down some thoughts, and I would like to share with you, if you give me just a few minutes. And also reflecting on what I've heard in this conference related to the next General Special Assembly on drugs, and related to UN ODC, because we had an interesting fellow from the UN ODC, Costa. And I would like to start with saying by Carl Sagan, yes. Yeah, you can't convince a believer of anything, for their belief is not based on evidence. It's based on a deep-seated need to believe. Well, here are my thoughts. About the UN ODC, I think it should change its name to start with, because it shows that drug is associated to crime from the start. Drugs and crime, so it's a direct association. That's, I think, but most users do not commit crimes. So the association of drugs to crime is contrary to common sense, and of course is not evidence-based. If the UN, if the UN anti-drug conventions play any role in supporting what's happening in Rio or São Paulo or Bogota, they should be repealed. Because what is happening in those cities, just to name a few, is an ongoing violation of human rights. Well, we probably know that the DEA has the DEA has 2 offices in Brazil, 2 in Colombia, 3 in Bolivia, and 1 office in all other South American countries except Uruguay. A few years ago, I was in a taxi in Bogota, and the driver pointed out to the American embassy and said it was the headquarters of the Colombian government. That's the taxi. It seems impossible to have a drug policy in Latin America not controlled by Washington. No country in Latin America would have the power to denounce the convention. Coca leaf is not a drug. Any convention that considers this plant a drug is full of bullshit from the start. I understand prohibition has a big historic mistake, but marijuana prohibition in the 21st century is like believing the sun revolves around the earth. Brazil does not incarcerate drug users anymore. According to the new drug law, drug users are still criminals, but their penalty does not include incarceration. On the other hand, penalties for trafficking has been increased. But how the law differentiate users from dealers? Simple. If you live in a deprived community, in a slum, you are a drug dealer. In Brazil, it's like you don't have drug users in the favelas. And drug dealers are mostly young black men, undereducated and poor. And similar to the target population of the drug war in the US, as I've learned from you. There are many drug-related organizations in Latin America, but it's rare to see their personnel speaking out clearly in favor of drug legalization. I suppose most of those groups understand clearly how prohibition generates the criminal drug trade, but they don't dare to speak out in favor of drug regulation. And so the same happens to scholars, intellectuals, journalists, writers, and artists who discuss and study the drug problem. They seem to think it's an heresy to speak out in favor of legalization. In Brazil, it took a long time for the harm reduction movement to assume their current stance in favor of drug regulation. Legalization means regulate by law. The harm reduction organizations in Brazil, they received money from the federal government and were afraid of having their funding cut. But now I think that because of the Ministry of Health in Brazil, it's very progressive and also indirectly supports drug regulation. And my last thought. When it comes to harm reduction, my Peruvian friend Baldomero Cáceres would say, well, I prefer benefit increase. and I had this thought. This thought came to my mind that maybe it's dangerous. I'm not sure, but I just want to share this with you. Maybe it's dangerous to have the UNODC in favor of harm reduction. Because what they most probably want is to control the scope of harm reduction. To advocate for harm reductions, as many NGOs are doing in the process of their participation in the next drug and gas, may be counterproductive. I think in order to put harm reduction in their agenda, you should advocate for radical drug legalization. And again, legalization means regulate by law. If you press in that direction, maybe they will be willing to accept harm reduction, fearing the worst. Fearing a world free of drug ignorance.
Thanks, Luis.